Lucas sat at the head of the grand dining table in his family's vast estate, his fingers tapping nervously on the fine wood. The room, though grand and meticulously arranged, felt suffocating. His parents sat across from him, each exuding an air of certainty, while he, in his mid-twenties, felt a creeping sense of unease wash over him. His father, stern and practical, spoke first, his voice steady as always. "Lucas, you've reached the age where the responsibilities of this family require you to settle down. It's time for you to marry." His mother, seated beside his father, gave a soft smile, her tone warm yet firm. "We found someone we think would be perfect for you. An arrangement, just like your father and I had. It's time to continue the legacy, my dear." Lucas clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to lash out. They had been discussing this for weeks now. His arranged marriage to a woman he had never even seen. The thought of being bound to someone based purely on family interests seemed archaic, a relic of another time. "I don't need an arranged marriage," Lucas replied, his voice edged with frustration. "I want to marry someone I choose, someone I can love." His father's face hardened. "Love will come in time, Lucas. You are not a boy anymore. This is about stability and securing the future of our business. This woman will bring what you need." Lucas's eyes narrowed. His father had always spoken like this, cold, calculating, seeing everything through the lens of business. And his mother, though kind-hearted, seemed content with simply accepting her husband's view. "But I don't want a business transaction," Lucas spat, his frustration boiling over. "I want a real marriage, not a deal." His mother's face softened, but she didn't back down. "You will get what you need in time, Lucas. You just have to trust us." Lucas pushed back his chair, the sound of it scraping across the floor too loud in the oppressive silence. "I can't. I won't." But as he stormed out of the room, the weight of his parents' expectation pressed down on him. He could feel his freedom slipping through his fingers. This was the price of his family's wealth. Freedom had become a luxury he no longer had. And the worst part was that it wasn't even the woman he had to marry he resented, but the entire system that demanded he sacrifice his autonomy for a business agreement disguised as a marriage. The next evening, Lucas reluctantly stood in the grand sitting room, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this meeting with the woman chosen for his marriage was inevitable, but he couldn't quell the anger and confusion swirling inside him. The door opened, and she entered. A vision in an intricate, flowing gown, her face obscured by a delicate veil. Her presence was commanding yet elusive, and it stirred something within Lucas that he couldn't quite define. She stopped at the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, and for a moment, the silence stretched between them. Lucas couldn't take it anymore. He walked forward, his voice sharp. "Why do you keep the veil on?" Her response was calm and composed, her voice soft but firm. "I prefer it this way." He frowned, frustrated by her lack of explanation. Was she hiding something? Why this secrecy? But why? "We're supposed to be partners. Shouldn't we know each other by now?" The woman, who Lucas now knew as Eliza, didn't flinch. She simply stood there, as if unaffected by his impatience. "I prefer to be seen for who I am, not just for my face." Lucas's frustration mounted. He had expected some kind of connection, some hint of the person behind the veil, but instead, all he found was more distance. He struggled to read her, to make sense of what she was thinking, but it was as if a wall stood between them, made of nothing but thin air and unspoken words. The evening continued in this awkward, strained silence. Every attempt to break through the tension failed. Lucas found himself unable to understand why Eliza acted this way. She wasn't what he had imagined, quiet, yes, but there was something else beneath that calm exterior, something that provoked both his curiosity and his irritation. And as the evening came to a close, he walked away with more questions than answers, his mind racing. What kind of woman would agree to this arrangement? What was she hiding behind that veil? And more importantly, why did it feel like he was the one on trial, not her? The day of the wedding arrived with a cold certainty, and Lucas felt every second of it in the pit of his stomach. The grand hall was filled with guests, the air thick with the murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the rustling of elegant gowns. His family, along with their esteemed friends, sat in the front rows, eyes turned expectantly toward the entrance as the ceremony began. Lucas stood at the altar, his nerves frayed, his thoughts a whirlwind. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting from this day. Some gesture, some sign that this was more than just a business arrangement, but all he felt was the weight of obligation pressing down on him. He wasn't sure if he could even call this a marriage. It felt more like an auction. His father, standing beside him, gave him a stiff nod, his face unreadable. His mother, always the picture of grace, beamed at him from the sidelines, as if this were the greatest moment of their lives. Then the doors opened, and Eliza walked in. Her presence filled the room, and for a moment, Lucas forgot to breathe. The gown she wore was beautiful, elaborate, and luxurious, yet somehow it seemed to cast her in a shadow, hiding her true self beneath layers of fabric and expectation. The veil she wore remained in place, shielding her face from view. Lucas's chest tightened, the familiar frustration bubbling up again. This was it. His life would be forever tied to a woman who remained an enigma, a woman he didn't know and could barely understand. The silence between them felt unbearable as Eliza took her place beside him, standing still as a statue, her eyes never meeting his. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows were exchanged, words that felt empty to Lucas's ears. The minister's voice echoed in his mind, but the weight of what was happening barely registered. All he could think about was the veil, the distance, the coldness between them. The guests, with their expectant eyes and polite smiles, seemed to peer into his soul, judging him, judging them. As the ceremony ended and the reception began, Lucas's heart sank. He found himself alone with Eliza in the midst of the celebration, their bodies still miles apart despite their physical proximity. There was no joy in this union, no spark. Eliza, ever composed, remained silent, her veil still in place, as if she had become part of the scenery, something to be observed but never fully understood. The evening dragged on, every conversation an awkward formality, every glance a reminder of the wall between them. Lucas sat through it all, his mind a mix of confusion and frustration. He watched Eliza as she interacted with others, her quiet strength undeniable, but it only served to deepen his sense of isolation. Who was this woman? What was her purpose in all of this? He couldn't help but feel betrayed. His parents, his family, had orchestrated this. They hadn't given him a chance to choose. His future was no longer his own, and it hurt more than he had ever anticipated. And as the night wore on, Lucas began to realize that the marriage he had so desperately fought against might not just be about him or Eliza. It might be about something far bigger, something he was not ready to confront. But one thing was certain. This marriage had only just begun, and he was already deeply lost in it. Days passed, and the silence between Lucas and Eliza grew louder. They lived under the same roof, shared the same meals, but never truly communicated. The discomfort between them was palpable, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in separate worlds. He had hoped that after the wedding, things might feel different. Perhaps they would find some common ground, some reason to connect, but instead, the chasm between them only seemed to widen. It wasn't until a few days after the wedding, in the midst of one of Lucas's many business meetings, that he saw something in Eliza that changed his entire perspective. He had been going over some legal contracts with his team, discussing the latest expansion of his company. As the meeting continued, Lucas's mind wandered. He found himself looking at Eliza, who was seated quietly in the corner of the room, her veil still in place, as always. She had been there all afternoon, listening intently, offering no words. Lucas assumed she was simply a passive observer, perhaps uninterested in the business side of things. But then something caught his attention, Eliza's eyes. They were sharp, calculating, and for the first time since their wedding, Lucas felt something shift. She was studying the contract in front of her, her expression focused. When the conversation moved to a key point in the contract, Lucas was about to speak, but Eliza beat him to it. "Wait," she said softly, her voice cutting through the room with unexpected authority. "There's a clause here that could cause issues down the road. If we don't address it now, it could lead to legal complications." Her words hung in the air, and Lucas felt his pulse quicken. The room fell silent, all eyes on Eliza. For a moment, he was speechless. His initial assumption, that she had no real understanding of the business world, was shattered in an instant. Eliza's insight was sharp, her analysis flawless. "How did you catch that?" Lucas asked, his voice thick with surprise. Eliza glanced up at him, her calm demeanor never faltering. "It's just a matter of paying attention to the details," she replied. "There are always patterns, things that others overlook." Lucas felt a strange warmth spread through him, a combination of admiration and respect. This woman, this enigma, was far more than he had given her credit for. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as an obedient wife, nothing more than a shadow in his life. But Eliza was far from passive. She was intelligent, perceptive, and not easily swayed. As the meeting wrapped up and everyone filtered out, Lucas remained in the room, his mind racing. He had never expected this, never anticipated the hidden depths she had revealed. There was something about Eliza that he hadn't understood before, a strength that lay beneath the surface, quiet but undeniable. And for the first time since their wedding, Lucas found himself wondering if he had been wrong about her all along. The weeks that followed continued in much the same way. Strained silences, polite exchanges, and a growing distance between Lucas and Eliza. However, there were moments, fleeting yet undeniable, that began to unravel the carefully constructed barrier between them. It was during these small moments that Lucas started to notice the woman beneath the veil, not just the partner he had been forced to accept, but someone with a complexity he had been blind to. One afternoon, as he walked through the grand estate on his way to the library, he overheard a conversation that made him pause. He had been moving through the house, preoccupied with a new set of business decisions, when he found himself near the kitchen. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could hear Eliza's voice, soft, but full of warmth, a stark contrast to the quiet, reserved figure he had grown accustomed to. She was talking to the staff, laughing at a joke one of the cooks had made, her words light and full of life. The way she interacted with the kitchen staff, genuine, engaged, caught Lucas off guard. He had always assumed Eliza was aloof, distant, and above it all. But here she was, sharing in a simple, human moment, with no pretense, no carefully constructed barriers. Curious, Lucas leaned closer, unable to tear himself away. Eliza's laugh was melodic, her smile radiant in a way that made her seem almost unrecognizable from the woman he had met on their wedding day. She was engaged, her voice laced with humor as she discussed the meal for that evening's banquet, giving suggestions with a quiet authority that surprised him even more. "Perhaps a little more rosemary in the sauce, don't you think?" she suggested, her tone full of warmth and confidence. The cook nodded eagerly, appreciative of her input. "Of course, madam. I'll adjust it right away." Lucas felt a strange sensation rise in his chest, a mix of admiration and something deeper, something unnameable. Eliza wasn't just the quiet woman behind the veil. She was engaged with the world around her, grounded in a way he had never expected. The sight of her, surrounded by people who clearly respected her, made him reconsider everything he had thought about her. He had dismissed her before, judged her as distant and cold, but now he saw a side of her that was full of life, compassion, and grace. It wasn't just this small interaction that began to change Lucas's mind. It was the sum of all these little details. Over the following weeks, he noticed her in various parts of the estate, speaking kindly to the gardener, offering encouragement to the housekeeper, even sitting with the elderly family members in the drawing room, listening patiently to their stories. She didn't just exist in the shadow of his expectations. She had her own life, her own interests, her own space in this world. And with each new glimpse, Lucas's view of her began to shift. He started to see her not just as a mysterious figure behind a veil, but as someone with a depth that had never been revealed to him. She was intelligent, capable, and kind, qualities that he had never imagined in someone so shrouded in mystery. One evening, he found himself seeking her out, not for the sake of business, but simply to talk. It was a small step, one that felt both awkward and necessary. He was beginning to wonder if he had been wrong about her, and this was the only way to find out. "Eliza," he began, his voice tentative. "Can we talk for a moment?" She turned to him, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Of course, Lucas. What's on your mind?" For a moment, he hesitated. There were so many things he wanted to ask her, so many questions about her life, her past, and who she really was beneath the veil. But he found himself focusing on something simpler. "Why do you always wear it?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "The veil, it's been months now. Why not show your face? Why hide?" Eliza was silent for a moment, her gaze distant, before she answered with quiet resolve. "The veil," she said, her voice steady, "isn't meant to hide me. It's to help others see me for who I am, beyond just my appearance. In this world, people see what they want to see. I wanted to see if anyone would look past the veil, past the surface, and understand the person I am beneath it." Lucas was struck by her words. He had never considered that the veil might be more than just a form of modesty or mystery. It was a test, a challenge he had failed, time and time again. "I never realized," he began, feeling a wave of shame wash over him. "I've been so caught up in my own expectations that I never even thought to look beyond what I saw." Eliza smiled faintly, her eyes softening with understanding. "It's not an easy thing, Lucas, to see beyond the surface. But I think we're all capable of it if we try." In that moment, Lucas felt the weight of his own ignorance. He had judged her, assumed things about her, and never once stopped to really understand who she was. And for the first time, he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't anticipated: respect. The days that followed that conversation with Eliza were filled with a new sense of clarity for Lucas. He began to realize how much he had misunderstood about her, and how much of his frustration with the marriage had been rooted in his own unwillingness to truly know her. There was no longer a veil between them, not the literal one she wore, but the metaphorical one of his own preconceived notions. Their interactions, though still somewhat formal, began to shift. Eliza no longer seemed like an impenetrable mystery, and Lucas found himself seeking her out more often. Whether it was for advice on business matters or simply to talk, he found that there was something in her that demanded respect. She wasn't just his wife in name. She was a woman with ideas, with intellect, and with a quiet strength that both challenged and intrigued him. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Lucas found himself alone with Eliza in the study. She was seated at the desk, quietly reading through a business report. He hesitated before speaking, but the urge to ask for her input on a recent proposal was too strong. "Eliza," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking about some of the ideas you brought up the other day about the business. I think you were right. The contract with the investors, there's a lot more to it than we realized." Eliza glanced up from the report, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of approval in her eyes. "I'm glad you think so," she replied, her voice calm. "It's always good to look at things from different perspectives." Lucas leaned against the desk, his gaze fixed on her. "I've never really asked for your opinion before. I guess I've always seen business as my world. But I was wrong." There was a quiet pause as Eliza regarded him. Then, with a small smile, she said, "Sometimes it takes a little while to see what's right in front of you." Her words resonated deeply with him, and in that moment, Lucas realized how much he had taken her for granted. Eliza wasn't just his wife. She was his equal, someone with the same drive, the same intellect, and the same capacity for growth. The bond between them, once frail and strained, was now beginning to grow stronger. Lucas could feel it, though he couldn't quite explain it. All he knew was that something had shifted, something that would change the course of their marriage forever. The night air was cool as Lucas stood by the study window, gazing out over the estate. His thoughts were a whirlwind, restless and unsettled. He had come to realize that he had been living in the shadows of his own expectations, clinging to the notion of control, of certainty. But with Eliza, everything was different. His entire perception of her had shifted in ways he had never anticipated. And now, as their interactions deepened, the question that had lingered in his mind grew louder. Why did she continue to wear the veil? What was the significance of it? He had to know. He couldn't continue to let this unspoken tension hang between them. Turning away from the window, he walked through the dimly lit corridors of the mansion, his steps echoing in the silence. He knew Eliza was in the library. She often spent her evenings there, reading, reflecting, or, as he had learned, engaging with business matters in ways he had underestimated. He found her seated at the long table, surrounded by books and papers, her focus unbroken as she scrolled through a document on her tablet. "Eliza," Lucas called out softly as he stepped inside. She looked up from her tablet, her veil falling gently around her face, the only part of her visible being her dark eyes that met his with an unreadable expression. "Lucas," she replied calmly, "what's on your mind?" There was a certain stillness in her demeanor, but her eyes softened as he approached, sensing his unease. For a moment, Lucas hesitated, unsure of how to start. The questions that had been bubbling inside him were tangled with frustration, confusion, and an unexpected yearning to understand her better. His voice, when it came, was more tentative than he had intended. "Why do you still wear it, Eliza?" he asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. "The veil. I need to know." Eliza paused, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. She placed her tablet down carefully, then stood, her movements deliberate, as if weighing her response. The silence that followed felt like a chasm, stretching between them, but Lucas wasn't going to back down. He needed the truth. "I wear it," she began slowly, "not because I'm hiding something, but because I want people to see me for who I am, beyond just my appearance." Lucas's brow furrowed. "But people still see you as a mystery," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I've seen it. I've been part of it. You're still just a woman behind a veil, and nothing more to most people. Don't you want to be seen for who you truly are?" Eliza's eyes softened, the flicker of something deeper passing through them. She crossed her arms, her posture no longer defensive but measured, and her voice was quiet but firm as she spoke. "The veil isn't meant to keep people away, Lucas. It's a test, a way to see if anyone will look beyond it, beyond the surface, and truly understand me. Not just what's on the outside, but what's inside." Her words hung in the air, and Lucas felt a sudden rush of shame. He had never once considered that the veil could be more than a barrier. To him, it had always been an obstacle to intimacy, a source of irritation. But now, as Eliza spoke, he realized how wrong he had been. He swallowed hard, his throat tight with regret. "I've been wrong, haven't I?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I've judged you, assumed things about you, without ever really knowing you." There was no malice in Eliza's gaze, only a quiet understanding. "It's natural to make assumptions, Lucas," she said softly, "but sometimes we need to look beyond them to see the truth." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt charged with a new energy, one that neither of them had anticipated. Lucas felt something inside him begin to shift, a flicker of admiration, of respect, of something more than just the transactional nature of their marriage. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice thick with sincerity. "I should have asked you sooner. I should have trusted you more." Eliza smiled faintly, her eyes gentle. "It's okay. We're learning, aren't we?" Lucas nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. It was the first real conversation they had ever had, and it felt like a turning point. He had stepped out of his own blind assumptions, and for the first time, he saw her, not as a woman shrouded in mystery, but as someone worthy of his respect. And perhaps, just perhaps, someone he could begin to care for. The days that followed were a quiet revelation for Lucas. The walls he had so carefully constructed around himself, his expectations, his assumptions, began to crumble. He had spent so much of his life in control, demanding things be done his way, living in a world where everything had its place and order. But with Eliza, nothing was as simple as it seemed. As the weeks passed, Lucas found himself reflecting on the things he had learned. He had been so quick to judge her, to dismiss her as a mystery that needed to be solved, when in reality, he had been the one who needed to change. Eliza had shown him that there was more to life than appearances, more to love than a simple, transactional arrangement. It wasn't just about seeing her beyond the veil anymore. It was about seeing himself beyond the rigid structure he had built for his life. He had always defined himself by his achievements, by the control he had over his empire. But now, as he stood beside Eliza, he felt the stirring of something deeper, an understanding of who he was becoming. One evening, they were alone in the garden, the quiet hum of the estate in the background. Eliza had taken to walking there most evenings, her veil now lifted, allowing the moonlight to kiss her features. Lucas, for the first time, saw her fully, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. She was a woman of depth, a woman who had lived a life of her own before he had ever come into the picture. "Eliza," he said quietly, as they walked along the garden path, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the veil, how it's meant to make people see more than what's on the surface. I guess I never really considered it before." She turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "I understand," she said. "It's not an easy thing, to see beyond the surface. But that's the key, isn't it? We all have layers, and sometimes the most beautiful things are hidden beneath the surface." Lucas nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I've spent my whole life trying to control everything. Business, people, even myself. But with you, I've realized I can't just control things. I have to learn to let go, to trust. And that means not just with you, but with myself, too." Eliza smiled softly, her eyes glowing in the moonlight. "It's a journey, Lucas, one that we take together." And in that moment, Lucas knew she was right. This wasn't just about him learning to see her. It was about both of them embarking on a journey of self-discovery, of letting go of old ways and embracing something new. The connection between them was deepening, slowly but surely. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy. But Lucas was beginning to understand that love, true love, wasn't about control or expectations. It was about trust, vulnerability, and seeing each other for who they truly were, not just the roles they had been forced into. And with Eliza, he was beginning to understand that more than ever before. Lucas spent the next few days in a haze of self-reflection. He had never been one to confront his own shortcomings so directly. But now, with Eliza's words echoing in his mind, he found himself unable to shake the feeling that he had been blind to something crucial, not just about her, but about himself. In a marriage built on expectations and social obligations, he had forgotten the most essential part, understanding. His mind wandered back to their early days together, to his impatience, his frustrations, and how quickly he had jumped to conclusions. What if she had been trying to show him something all along? What if she had been testing him, not out of malice but out of a deep desire for connection? He had spent so much time seeing her as a woman veiled in mystery that he never once considered what lay beneath the surface. It was time to admit that his approach had been wrong. One evening, after a long day of meetings and decisions that had left him mentally drained, Lucas found himself standing outside the library once again, a place where he and Eliza had spent many hours in silence. He hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. Eliza was seated near the large windows, a soft glow from the setting sun casting her in an almost ethereal light. Her veil was absent tonight, her face clear, her eyes deep with thought. "Eliza," he called softly, stepping into the room. She looked up, her gaze steady, but there was something different in the way she looked at him now, an openness that had been absent before. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm but warm, "is everything all right?" He walked closer, his footsteps slow but deliberate. He had come to a decision, one that he knew would be difficult to make but essential to their future together. There was no room for pride, no place for defensiveness. He had to confront the truth, not just with her but with himself. "I need to apologize," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been so wrong. I've judged you, and I've made assumptions based on things I didn't even understand. I've been selfish. I thought this marriage, our marriage, was just a duty, a transaction. But I see now that I've been blind." Eliza remained silent for a moment, her eyes never leaving his. Her expression was unreadable, but Lucas could feel the weight of her gaze, steady and unwavering. "I judged you for the veil," he continued, his heart beating faster with every word. "I thought it was something you used to hide behind. But I see now that it wasn't about that at all. It was about asking me to look deeper, to look past what I thought I knew, to see you for who you really are. And I didn't do that. I'm sorry. A quiet sigh escaped Eliza's lips, and she stood up slowly, walking toward him. The air between them seemed to hum with unspoken emotion, the distance between them shrinking with each passing second. You don't need to apologize, she said softly. I knew this wouldn't be easy. You've spent your life building walls, Lucas. I just wanted to know if you were willing to take them down. For me. For us. Her words cut through him like a blade, sharp and true. He had built so many walls around himself. Walls that kept others out. Walls that kept him safe from vulnerability, from feeling too much. But now, standing in front of Eliza, he felt them crumbling, piece by piece. I'm willing, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I want to understand you. I want to be with you, Eliza. I want to stop seeing you as a mystery to solve and start seeing you as someone I can love. She reached out, her hand brushing his cheek, the touch soft but filled with a quiet strength. Then let's start there, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's start by letting go of our pasts, of our fears, and seeing each other for who we truly are. And in that moment, everything shifted. The tension that had defined their relationship for so long melted away, replaced by a new understanding, a new connection. For the first time, Lucas felt the weight of his own vulnerability, and for the first time, he was willing to share it with her. The days following their conversation were a delicate balance of growth and introspection. Lucas and Eliza, now more attuned to each other's needs and emotions, began to forge a deeper connection than either had ever imagined possible. It wasn't immediate, nor was it easy, but it was real. Lucas found himself seeking her advice more frequently, not just about business but about life. There was a quiet wisdom in her words, an intelligence that surpassed his initial expectations. What he had once perceived as aloofness, he now recognized as a measured strength. Eliza was not a passive figure in his life. She was an active participant, challenging him, encouraging him, and yes, even teaching him. One morning, as they sat in the study together, reviewing some documents, Lucas couldn't help but marvel at how much he had come to rely on her. She had a unique way of approaching problems, a methodical, thoughtful process that cut through the noise and focused on what mattered most. And more than that, she had a calm confidence that was both comforting and invigorating. Eliza, this is brilliant, he said, his voice tinged with admiration. How did you come up with this idea? She smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her eyes light up. It's just a different way of looking at things. You taught me that sometimes we have to step back and see the bigger picture. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with the implications of what she had just said. It was true. He had spent so much time focusing on the details, on the immediate goals, that he had forgotten to consider the bigger picture. But Eliza had a way of seeing things that he had never fully appreciated until now. I never would have seen that, he admitted. You're incredible, Eliza. She looked at him, her gaze soft but filled with meaning. We're a team, Lucas. We both have strengths, and we both have weaknesses. But together, we can do things I never thought possible. It was in moments like this that Lucas felt the true depth of their connection. They were no longer just a husband and wife in name. They were partners in every sense of the word. And as their bond deepened, so did Lucas's understanding of the woman he had once been so quick to judge. The veil, once a symbol of separation, now felt like a distant memory. It had never been about hiding, only about asking him to look beyond the surface and truly understand her. And now, as they worked together, built together, and shared their lives, Lucas realized that what had started as a mere transaction had transformed into something much more powerful. Love, he was beginning to understand, was not about expectations or surface-level impressions. It was about trust, respect, and the willingness to build something real, something lasting. As the days passed, Lucas found himself not just falling in love with Eliza, but also with the idea of building a life with her. They had come so far, from the walls of misunderstandings to the quiet understanding they now shared. And as they continued to work together, to challenge each other, Lucas knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. They weren't just partners in business. They were partners in life. And together, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. The anticipation surrounding the upcoming gala had reached a fever pitch. Lucas could feel the weight of the evening's significance as he prepared for the event, not just as a business mogul, but as a man whose life had been fundamentally altered by the woman he had married. This gala, a social event with the city's most powerful individuals, was not just a celebration of wealth and influence. It was a stage where masks were often worn and facades were carefully maintained. But tonight, something was different. For the first time, Lucas was aware of the irony in it all. The world around him seemed so intent on appearances, but he had learned, with Eliza, that true connections were formed when those masks were removed. Eliza, of course, had her own apprehensions. The veil, a constant presence for so long, had been more than just a literal piece of cloth. It had been a shield, an armor that had kept the world at arm's length. She had worn it not out of a desire to conceal her beauty, but because she wanted to test something. She wanted to see if Lucas could see past the surface, past the barrier of her appearance, and truly see her for the person she was. Now, as they stood at the entrance of the gala, the grand ballroom spread before them, she felt the weight of the decision pressing upon her. "Are you ready?" Lucas asked softly, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. They were standing on the steps just outside the ballroom, the lights of the event spilling out into the darkened night, casting long shadows across the stone. Eliza took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the edge of her veil. "I think it's time," she said, her voice steady, but there was a certain vulnerability in it that made Lucas's heart ache. Together, they walked into the grand ballroom, the murmurs of the guests falling silent as they entered. Lucas's grip on Eliza's hand tightened, but there was no tension in it, only a quiet support, a promise that he was with her, no matter what. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on them, but this time, he didn't care. He was no longer the same man who had entered into this marriage driven by duty and expectation. Now, he was a man who saw the woman by his side for the person she truly was. And when she finally lifted her veil, it was not just the world that would see her, but Lucas too. Eliza reached up, her fingers trembling slightly as she took hold of the delicate fabric. The room seemed to hold its breath as she slowly drew it back, revealing her face to the light for the first time. The guests gasped in awe, but Lucas barely noticed. His eyes were locked on Eliza, on the woman who had once been hidden behind a symbol of mystery, now standing before him in full view. The beauty that had been concealed was breathtaking, but it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the depth of her gaze, the quiet strength and vulnerability in her eyes. She was not just beautiful. She was powerful, intelligent, and confident. She was Eliza, in all her glory, no longer hidden, no longer a mystery. And in that moment, Lucas understood. The veil had never been about hiding her beauty. It had been about allowing him to see the person underneath it all. The woman who had challenged him, made him grow, and had, without him realizing it, already become the woman he had fallen in love with. Eliza turned to face him, her expression soft but resolute. She didn't need to speak. Everything was conveyed in the look they shared, a silent understanding that transcended words. She had chosen to trust him, to remove the veil, not just for the world to see her, but for him to see her, truly see her. Lucas stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers, and without a word, he took her hand in his, holding it gently but firmly. The crowd, who had once looked at them with expectation and judgment, now regarded them with a newfound respect. Lucas felt the weight of their gaze shift, from one of scrutiny to admiration, not for the wealth they represented, but for the genuine connection they shared. He leaned in, his voice low and filled with emotion. "You're more than I ever imagined, Eliza. You've shown me what true strength looks like, and I am in awe of you." She smiled, a soft, knowing smile, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And you've shown me what it means to love someone for who they are, not for what they bring to the table." They stood there, hand in hand, in the center of the ballroom, as the world continued to swirl around them. But for Lucas and Eliza, there was only one truth that mattered now. They had found something real, something that no surface appearance could ever define. It was a bond built on understanding, patience, and respect. And as the evening wore on, and the guests continued to marvel at Eliza's beauty, Lucas found himself marveling at something far more important, the woman who had revealed herself to him, not just as a wife, but as a partner in every sense of the word. In the weeks that followed the gala, the world seemed to shift around Lucas and Eliza. The attention they had garnered at the event was not just for their wealth or their social status, but for the way they had conducted themselves. Their relationship had become something of a symbol, a beacon of what could happen when people took the time to truly understand one another, when they stripped away the superficialities and embraced the essence of who they were. Lucas had grown in ways he never thought possible. The man who had once been driven by ambition and pride now found himself guided by patience, empathy, and a deeper sense of purpose. He no longer saw Eliza as just his wife, but as his equal, his confidant, and the most valuable partner he could ever hope for. She had taught him more than any business deal or corporate strategy ever could. She had shown him the importance of seeing people for who they truly were, of loving them not for what they could offer, but for who they were beneath the surface. Their business ventures flourished not just because of their collective skills, but because they had learned to trust each other in ways they never had before. Their bond, forged in the fire of misunderstanding and misjudgment, had become the cornerstone of everything they built together. One day, as they sat in their office, reviewing contracts and discussing future plans, Lucas looked at Eliza and felt a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just for the success they had achieved, but for the journey they had taken together. The growth they had experienced, both individually and as a couple, was something he never could have anticipated when they first married. He realized that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to discover, to explore, and to build together. "Eliza," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I don't think I could have done any of this without you. You've made me a better man." She looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with strength. "And you've made me a better woman. Together, we're unstoppable." And with that, they knew that their future was brighter than ever. They weren't just husband and wife anymore. They were partners in every sense of the word. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together with the same trust, respect, and love that had brought them to this moment. Their love had grown from something fragile into something unshakable, and with each passing day, they built a life that was truly theirs. And in that new beginning, they found the one thing they had always been searching for: each other. As time passed, the story of Lucas and Eliza became one not just of love, but of transformation. Their journey, once marked by tension and misunderstandings, had blossomed into a partnership built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. They had come to realize that the greatest love was not one that was dictated by society's expectations, but one that grew organically, shaped by the depth of understanding and acceptance. The veil, which had once separated them, was now nothing more than a distant memory, a symbol of the barriers they had broken together. What remained was a love that had been tested, refined, and strengthened by the trials they had faced. A love that transcended the surface and dug deep into the very essence of who they were. Lucas often found himself marveling at the woman who had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. Eliza had taught him the most important lesson of all, that true beauty is found not in the appearance, but in the soul. She had shown him that love isn't about perfection. It's about growing together, accepting each other's flaws, and becoming better because of them. And as they looked toward the future, there was no doubt in their minds. Their journey was far from over. With each passing day, they continued to learn, to evolve, and to build a life that was uniquely their own. In the end, they had not only found love but had built a legacy, a testament to the power of seeing each other for who they truly were and loving each other with all their hearts. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the full story. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Lucas and Eliza and found inspiration in their transformation. If you liked the story, please don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback means the world to us. If you want to follow more of our stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you again for being part of this incredible experience, and we look forward to sharing more with you soon.